History, the study of past events and examining the causes and effects of these events, as well as investigating how people lived in the past, plays a huge role in how systems are formed. This, together with politics, is the foundations on which most countries are built, and a career down this path is promising and fulfilling. Making a dramatic career change can be daunting, especially transitioning from fields like history and politics into the world of tech consulting. In this episode, we sit with Alice Aspinall, a consulting practice lead at BigSpark, who walks us through her journey on pivoting careers and how others can glean from her experience to strategically build their careers. Enjoy today's episode. This episode is brought to you by BigSpark. BigSpark is the UK's fastest growing data solutions consultancy, translating your business needs into data architecture, strategy, and engineering. Together with their technical partners, they focus on swift and efficient business value delivery. Taking an innovative approach to every challenge, BigSpark is an agile team of over 100 world-class engineers and data scientists pushing the boundaries of what can be achieved with AI, data, software, cloud, and machine learning. To find out how BigSpark can ignite your data solution, visit us at www.bigspark.dev. BigSpark, igniting change through engineering. Hello everyone, welcome to the Tech Self Podcast, where we navigate today's tech wave, one electrifying conversation at a time. I am your host, Raymond Klutse, and today I have an amazing person on the Pivoting Career series to talk to us about her journey. I have Alice Aspinall. I hope I got the name right.
You did,
If I
yeah.
didn't, okay, perfect. Well, Alice, thank you so much for accepting to join the Tech Self Podcast. Really good to have you here. So I want you in the shortest amount of time, briefly introduce yourself, your background, and then we can get into the juice of today's conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's lovely to be here, and thank you, Raymond, for inviting me. So, Alice Aspinall, I am currently a consulting practice lead at BigSpark. My career in the last kind of 10 years or so has been across a various kind of different jobs, but mostly consulting, financial services, data, and tech. But I come from quite a different background in terms of education, which is what I'm hoping to talk to you about today.
Right. Amazing. That's one of the best brief intros I've ever had on this podcast, but very succinct, but very top notch. All right. So when it comes to history and for that matter, politics, maybe let's start on the history side. I had a huge challenge with years or dates when I was doing any form of history when I was in school. It was very challenging for me, and the idea of having to do that for 4 years, scary for me. So every time I saw people do something around the lines of history, I was like, okay, what is the end goal? Now I know you did history and politics, so maybe there was a possibility of you wanting to go into politics or maybe get into policy making, whatever it is. If you could walk us through why history and politics, and yeah, why
Yeah,
history and
absolutely.
politics.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, when I was sort of thinking about what we were going to talk about. I
Mm,
was thinking about I had to kind of revisit the journey myself. Like, why did I do
mm,
a history and politics
right,
degree? It was a few years
right.
ago now.
Mm,
So I think the main reason was when I was at school, I had the most fantastic history teacher, and she just completely inspired me in terms of it being a subject I wanted to learn more about.
mm,
We learnt about history in kind of a different way through like the popular culture at the time. So she
mm.
used to play us like what music was in the charts at that time or what
Oh,
movies were being released. So we studied a lot of American history. So that was really a cool thing for us to learn about and try and kind of
right,
like experience as much as we could what life might
right,
have been like at these
mm,
different historical events. And
right.
because it was so kind of fun and interesting and a different way of thinking about it. I think when people think about history, they think old stuff, boring, grey,
Mm,
books, dates, like, but we did it in such a different way that you kind of felt like you were in the history, that it
mm,
made me love it. And I just
mm,
wanted to learn more about kind of different things that had impacted the life we lead today.
mm.
The politics side was a slightly later inclusion. So
Okay.
um, when I decided to go to university, I wanted to keep the history that I was studying quite modern. So I wanted to
Mm.
stay within the last kind of 200, 300 years of period of time. And
Right.
by doing that, you could combine it with a politics degree. So I learned more about how the political system works in the UK, which I think a lot of people just never really learn.
Right.
So it was a bit of an experience for me to kind of tie those two things together.
Mm.
But yeah, something I still have obviously a keen interest in today.
Mm. That's amazing. So, having studied history and politics, one will say there are two career paths. Maybe one will say you could use. I mean, you can't. You. I mean, in fact, you still use history in politics because you need to know a lot about where we're coming from, where we're going, and how the system and the laws and all of that, were formed. History, I tend to find a bit limiting because you mentioned history teacher, and most of the time that's where I think the cap is. Permit me or correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I've always seen history to be. That's what you eventually become. What did you think a career was going to be like for you after history and politics?
Well, it's a very good question. So I did originally want to become a history teacher.
Fair.
So your assumption is correct. That was something I really thought I would end up doing.
Mm.
Um, Kind of as I went through university and met more people on the politics side, and there were
Right.
a lot of people in my politics course who were also
Mm.
studying that alongside sociology, so coming at it from a slightly different angle.
Right.
I got more interested in the charity sector, the volunteering sector. So that's what I assumed I would do after university. I would go and
Mm.
work for an NGO. Once upon a time, my dream job was to work for the UN. To be honest, I'd
Mm.
still love to work for the UN.
Right.
So that's kind of the sort of thing I would end up doing, more on kind of
Mm.
policy making or
Right.
NGO type work. Um, and that stuff, yeah, I mean, it still really interests me. So yeah, that's what a career in history kind of opened my eyes to, was
Mm.
more on that kind of policy making side, on more on the politics side.
Mm. That's quite interesting. Then tech comes into the picture, which is a totally opposite end of history. If you can walk us through how or what led you into tech consulting for that matter.
Yeah, so it was kind of by accident that I ended up
Mm.
in tech consulting. So when I was finishing university, I was doing an internship. And the internship I was doing was between EY, who are kind of one of the big four consultancies,
Mm.
and a charity called the Social Mobility Foundation. So they were doing a joint project to look at what stopped young people from getting into professional careers and work, and
Mm.
kind of why were people dropping out of education at school or before they even
Right.
finished school. So we did a really interesting project. And whilst I worked with them, I kind of fell in love more with the consulting side of it than I did the charity side, which I
Mm.
wasn't expecting to, but I just loved the sort of camaraderie of working in a big organization. Um, so when I finished my degree, I decided I wanted to go and work in consultancy and financial services. Now, at that time, there wasn't much that wasn't tech. Most consultancy projects involve technology. You can't get away from it.
Right.
And as I was spending more time and doing more projects, lots of the work we were doing was around data migration. Clients were implementing huge, Oracle or SAP solutions and
Right.
needed to move data from A to B. You couldn't avoid tech at that time.
Right.
And I kind of saw that the work that we were doing was more and more moving to be focused around data. So that's why I ended up becoming a kind of data consultant out of a
Mm.
history degree. So yeah, by accident, but
a, ve-
it's worked
a
out pretty
very
well so far.
a very interesting amalgamation, if you ask me, because one would never imagine. I grew up in Ghana, and I don't know how history is taught in school, but the way you were talking about history, I hope any history teacher listening to this podcast by accident, I mean, will take an anecdote from that. But most of the time, people who study in most African um, communities, the path is mostly, one way. If you're studying IT, you becoming a pharmacist or something is very rare.
Mm,
Obviously, there are a few careers that pivoting into can be very tricky. But I had an episode with one friend of mine who read geography and now is a data analytics manager. So I realized that, oh, people are actually doing that in the space. So it actually changed my entire perspective about pivoting. And it's just nice seeing how you went in with your history and politics degree, but then you started doing things and, supporting clients with very huge projects, which is very interesting. If you could walk us through some of the roles you've occupied in the data space. I know tech consulting is very wide, so maybe a few top three roles that you have,
Yeah,
occupied.
absolutely. So I think when I first started, um, kind of in consultancy and in data consultancy,
Right.
most of the most of the roles I was doing were related to more kind of project management.
All right.
So being part of a PMO team, so helping to manage, is the project green, amber, or red? What issues do
Mm,
we have? How do we overcome them? Which work streams need more support? How are we doing against budgets? So although it was working on data projects, it was kind of not really technical data or tech
mm,
skills that were needed.
mm, mm,
From there, I moved into a very different role for me, which was, I was a test manager for a new systems implementation at a wealth management client. I'd never
mm.
done testing before. I hope they don't listen to this because they definitely thought I had done testing before. But anyway, it all went okay. Um, so I had to learn what SIT testing was, what
Mm,
UAT testing was, how
right.
to manage defects, how
Mm,
to do a sort of dress rehearsal weekend
mm,
before a system go live. It
mm,
was a totally thrown in the deep end situation. So a kind of background as a tester, which I really enjoyed doing. Um, then from there, I moved into kind of more on the training side. So I suppose I really enjoyed the UAT part of
mm,
testing and getting
right.
users to understand a new system. So I moved
Mm,
into more training type roles from there. And then kind of since then, I've taken on, moved from kind of work stream leads to project leads to kind of program leads, and I've combined some of my technical experience with my project management experience.
right.
So most of what I do now is kind of overseeing engagements rather than
Mm,
getting involved in kind of specific techie roles within a
mm,
engagement itself.
mm. That's amazing. Someone listening to this will say, "Oh wow, she has just done it all, and it was as easy as she's saying it." But I'm sure you had a few challenges along the way. If you could, expound on a few, one or two, if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably one of the biggest challenges I face today, and I think, people use the term imposter syndrome a
All
lot,
right.
and I definitely suffer from that. And I think
Mm,
one of the biggest issues I have now is, I'm not as technical as a lot of
mm,
people that I manage or that I work with.
all right.
And sometimes you feel like I don't know enough to be
Mm,
talking about these things.
mm,
And that's definitely a challenge that I face now and will probably
mm,
continue to face. I think
all right.
the way I deal with that is that not everyone can't know everything. So
Yeah.
everyone has their areas of specialism, and you can't know everything all of the time, especially with how quickly things change in our
All
industry.
right.
There's no
All
way
right.
of keeping up. So I have to kind of retell myself that. I think probably one of the other areas that I kind of struggle with a little bit is just, as I said, like there's so much change in our industry, just like staying on top of things. And
Mm,
I'll often be in situations where people will mention something, some new advancement in a certain area, and you think,
mm,
I just can't keep up. That can be quite
mm,
stressful, I find.
all right.
But yeah, I just have to remind myself that, everyone operates at their own pace and everyone's a specialist in different areas. And my specialism is bringing together the specialists to get the end goal met. So,
Exactly.
that's what I bring to the table anyway. That's how I tell
Exactly.
myself.
And it's actually a very important part of, working in an organization or with people because the people management and everything, people are complex, we're complex beings. And once you're able to get the right person for the right job, I mean, that is a huge contribution because outside that organization or that level of organizing people, the job will not be done no matter how skilled the people are. So I think it's a very good contribution. Now, my question is going to be a little bit tricky. I know one will ask, or maybe a common question will be, how did your background in history and politics, play a huge role in your tech expertise? But I'm doing the inverse. How has your experience in tech consulting changed your perspective or had a perspective on history and politics?
So, yeah, it's harder doing it the other way around. So
Yes.
I think one of the most interesting things, and I suppose thinking about this particularly at the moment, given everything that's in
Mm,
the news about what's going on
mm,
in Israel and with
mm,
Hamas and everything else, like
mm,
knowing that what you read in the news isn't necessarily 100% truthful is very helpful, right? Because I know from a tech background that the algorithms that are in lots of these kind of news sources and social media sources are not necessarily pushing you the most important story or the most
Right.
truthful story. And therefore, it makes me more critical of what I'm reading, and it makes me go out and look for more sources of information to try and figure out, okay, with current affairs and with politics, like, where does the truth lie? And it stops me reading the first headline that comes up, right? And I think knowing that how the underlying tech works to push you different stories actually really helps you be a bit more critical. I was going to say cynical. I don't want to sound like too cynical, but you have to question things, I think.
Yes, exactly. It's fair. That's fair. And I think it's true, as much as tech and social media is a great tool, we all use it, LinkedIn, whatsoever. Fake news is a huge issue. I remember during my my master's, I was doing a project on um sentiment analysis with reviews. How truthful are these reviews, were they written by a human being, fake news detection and all that. And it's a scary time we're living in now with chat gpt and llms that can regurgitate whatever it is that they have in their system, and it will all be lies. Because if you ask chat gpt right now about Israel and another country, it would say something, and someone who does not know how to do very objective journalism will just take that and put it in the news, and it will just become fake news. And fake news unfortunately spreads faster than real news. So I think it's actually very good to know that from a techie point of view, we still have to have that microscopic lens on
Mm-hmm.
what we are consuming and how truthful it is. Now, someone listening will say, okay, I'm in school, maybe in the UK, in Ghana, and Africa, and I'm finding it hard to pivot. How should someone pivot properly, with a career or with a background that is not very much tech based?
So the way I've always thought about my career is less about getting from A to B and more about getting from A.1 to A.2 to A.3 and thinking about
Right.
it as different steps along the journey. Now, I've never had particularly an end goal in mind of saying sort of, in 10 years I want to do this, in
Mm,
5 years I want to do that. I've never really had that. And I've always felt my career is more about learning what I don't like than what I do like. And
mm,
so with each kind of increment that I go on the journey, I think,
right.
what didn't I like about that I can take out of what I do next? And it's all about refining what I want to do. So I think it's those kind of two things. Number one is, don't think about it as one massive pivot that you have to make in one
Right.
go. Think of it as little incremental steps on the journey. How can I get a little bit closer with each thing I do? And it's all learning along the way, right? And then in doing that, you might find that actually you love this thing over here that you'd never even thought about doing, and you want to stay there. But even if you don't love it, think about the things that you like about it and the things you don't like. And then that's how I've always figured out what do I want to do next,
Mm,
is kind of based on what I've just done, what I liked and what I didn't like, and that
right.
refining over time.
Hello there, Tech Surfers. I have got some news for you. The Tech Surf podcast is now on Instagram and LinkedIn. Follow us on Instagram at the Tech Surf podcast and LinkedIn, the Tech Surf podcast, to stay up to date on new episodes and to get interactive. Don't forget to like, share, and send us feedback on your favorite episodes and the lessons you've learned. See you soon. As easy as it is for someone to say, okay, I came from a non-tech background into a tech-facing um, career, one will think that, oh, technical skills are not very much needed. You just came in and then you were riding on the project management bits. But like you mentioned, you were talking about sit testing and all that. I'm sure you've had to work on a few hard technical stuff that was a bit of a learning curve. If you could walk us through maybe one interesting project you worked on that really puts you to that technical drill.
Yeah, so I think that role I did where I was the test manager was definitely the hardest. So I had to do database testing, having never used SQL in my life.
Mm,
So
mm,
I had to teach myself how to interrogate a database using SQL, like using online courses. And
mm.
it, to me, it was like totally, it's like learning a foreign language. I was like, I
Right.
don't even know what these things mean. So that was probably the hardest thing I've had to do in terms of like picking up a technical skill that
Mm,
I didn't like really have any knowledge of. Now, it was for a specific role that I did immediately, so it was super helpful because I had to use it right there and then. And I think that's what having, it's difficult to learn technical things unless you're going to apply them straight away, because they just
True.
go in one ear and out the other.
Right.
So
Right.
I did a course, this is a good few years ago now, around kind of how to do architecture. Um, and like, I never have done an architecture project. So
Mm,
it's just, it was almost a waste of time because I didn't use
mm,
it. So
right.
couldn't apply it straight away. So it kind of never really stayed in my brain. So I think that's what I would probably say is, like, if you need to learn a specific skill, do something you're going to use right away, because you have to apply it to remember it. Or at least I do. That's the way I learn
Mm,
anyway. Otherwise, it's,
mm.
as I say, it's gone out of my brain forever otherwise.
It happens to even the best of techies. I have written a few certifications. When you don't use it, after a while, it feels stale until you put in a situation where you have to use it. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing or a wrong thing, but yeah, I think it's just very much a human thing that happens to all of us. Now let's get a bit of, away from typical techie stuff. You did mention earlier before we were about to record that she has a dog, so I just want to get a bit into away from work, this busy, bustling 9 to 5, 9 to 10, 9 to whichever time you have to work, sometimes overtime. What does life look like away from your desk?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky. So I moved house over the summer, and I now live in proper countryside.
Mm,
So I live in a small village in Oxfordshire, and it was a big move. So previous to that, I lived in London and I lived in Edinburgh. So I was very much, city life was what I knew. And my husband and I decided to make the plunge and move to the countryside, and it's been a bit of an adjustment. So there's no street lights here, so it's pitch black outside right now, which
no.
makes it interesting walking the dog in the winter because it's dark at
Right.
4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
So it's an adjustment, but like, when I finish work, if it's still light or on the weekends, I can walk for 2 or 3 minutes and I'm in fields or I'm in woodland, and it's just, all you can hear is birds, or if you're lucky you can hear cows or horses
Mm,
or other
mm,
farm animals. And
mm,
that just is so good for me to kind of clear my mind and kind of switch off from work, so I
mm,
absolutely love that.
mm.
Other than that, like, my husband and I are very, very into sports. So any sports that's on, we'll be watching. So avidly watching the Rugby World Cup at the moment.
Okay, that's nice.
My husband's a big football fan, so most weekends we'll have football on. He's also a big golfer. So downstairs in my living room at the moment, we have a golf putting practice thing
Oh,
that's in the
nice.
middle of the living room. So if we get
Right.
bored, we're just golf putting in the living room. So
Mm,
yes, I think sports and like being outdoors is probably the two biggest things for me.
right. Okay, I'm going to play a little bit on your career path,
Hmm.
right? If you were given the chance to become a history teacher tomorrow, would you become a history teacher? Maybe a part time?
I would do it if I could choose my students. I think, I think the older I've got, the more I
Right,
think, like, I don't have children,
right, okay.
and I don't know if I could spend all day with kids. Just remembering what I was like at school, like, you've got to have the patience of a saint. I don't
Right,
know if I'd be ready for
right,
it.
right. But I think once you had a great history teacher, I'm sure you will still do a good job. Maybe not as low to that, maybe the year when you started enjoying history, but maybe a little bit higher, maybe junior high school or something. Who knows? But yeah, I think it'll be also be very nice for them to see how you are mixing up those two worlds, and it's quite interesting. Do you love to read? I don't know. What are you reading at the moment? Because obviously you read history, so I assume that
Yeah,
you probably love the numbers, the books. Do you have
I
an
don't
interesting book you're reading at the moment?
I don't read as much as I should, is the honest
Okay.
answer. But when I
Okay.
do read, I've just been on holiday, so I have read quite a lot recently. But
Okay.
I tend to read non-fiction, so I
Mm.
don't often enjoy reading fiction, and I think that probably is because of my history background. Like, I want
You
to,
like facts?
yeah, I want to absorb more and learn more, right?
Mm.
So that I've just started a book. about kind of the history of the Middle East and kind of what makes the modern Middle East, because that's
Okay.
a real gap in my knowledge. My history degree never taught me anything about it. So
Right.
I'm keen to kind of learn more about that. So that's an interesting book I've just started reading. But yeah,
Mm,
a lot of books about kind of non-fiction topics. I think probably the place I get most of my kind of knowledge and information and entertainment as well around politics is podcasts. So I listen to a lot of daily news and opinion type podcasts that kind of give me that sort of stuff of what's
mm,
happening on a daily pulse.
right.
So yeah, that's where I get most of my
Mm,
information from.
mm. That's cool. Now, in terms of your career, I like asking my guests this question because it gets them to reflect. If you could do something differently or better, looking back at how far you've come, what would that be if you could change something in that history?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think without wanting to undo my answer earlier about
Mm,
imposter
mm,
syndrome,
mm,
I do think I could have done more to learn more technical skills
mm,
when I first started doing
mm.
more technical type consulting.
Right.
I think I ended up being in a project management type role that meant it was easy to not do the technical stuff,
Mm,
and that's just made it things harder for me as I've kind of gone on through my career, or it's felt harder even if it hasn't been harder.
mm,
um so that's probably the one thing I would change. I think the only other thing is I wish I'd worked abroad. I mean, I could obviously still do that at some point, it's a long career, but I've never worked abroad. I've always been in the UK, so that's another thing I'd love to do if I had my time
mm,
again.
mm. That's nice. That's nice. Well, I have I left the shores of Ghana 5 years ago, lived in France for 3 years, and moved to the UK. And I would say my perspective on life has just been very wide, very wholesome, and I would recommend it to anyone. It comes with its challenges. You see my recent post on LinkedIn with my German and French friend. As enjoying and as nice as the LinkedIn post is now, looking back, there were a lot of things I had to, a lot of hurdles, different cultures, different perspective on life. But I see how that has opened me to even work better with people and also understand people for who they are, and also know when to let my voice be heard and when to be quiet, and just to balance it out. So I think I would recommend it, and I don't know whether it's going to be a remote one, which I would not recommend. Definitely, I'll recommend moving countries. I think that would be good to enjoy the people, enjoy the culture, agree to disagree, do all the shebang, the food, and the walk down the street, take the nice pictures like I do because I have quite a busy Instagram life sometimes. But yeah, do all that. Now, in terms of skills, right? In terms of skills, what is the next skill that you want to learn? I know the tech space is flooded with AI and LLMs and all that. Just on a personal base, maybe it could be a piano, it could be cooking or something. Is there any
Yes,
major skill?
two things I think. So piano is actually one of them. So I
Mm,
think everyone probably thinks back to, when we had the COVID lockdowns and think, oh, I wish I'd done
mm,
it then. I had so much
right,
time and didn't
right.
do it. So piano is something I'd love to do. I'm not very musical, but I'd love to kind of get a keyboard and learn piano.
Mm.
That's something I'd love to do. The other thing is a language. And my excuse for not having done it so far is I can't decide which language to learn.
Well, I recommend French.
Well,
French all the way.
French is the only one I even know a small bit of, so I've got a slight head start on French, so maybe that's the
Mm,
one. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I have a habit of trying to take on too many things at once, so
mm.
I have to be patient with
Patient
myself.
and pace
But
yourself
yes,
one day
so
at a time.
exactly, either the piano or French. I think not
Mm,
both, or
mm.
I'll never be able to have any time for work.
I know we have work to do, isn't it? Growing up in London and growing up as a young lady, who had a major impact on your life? It could be maybe family, or it could be a mentor or a celebrity. Anyone who had a major impact on your life.
I think I'd say my aunt. So
Mm,
my dad's sister. She had a really, really successful career at
mm,
IBM.
mm,
And she's never married, she doesn't have children, but
mm,
she is fiercely independent.
mm,
She has an amazing life now where she
mm,
travels the world,
mm,
and she doesn't have to ask anyone for permission, and
mm,
she just has so much freedom. And
mm,
I think when we were growing up, like seeing a single woman work really
mm,
hard for
mm,
herself wasn't something you often saw. You saw
mm,
people working hard for their kids, and obviously that's incredible in a different way. But just seeing her work hard for herself, I think, is really inspirational. And people like that don't get called out very often.
mm,
So yeah, I'd say my aunt, and she's been an amazing kind of role model and
mm,
um, kind of sounding board for me over the years. And her having worked at IBM and me having worked in
mm,
financial consulting, we could obviously share stories, and she's always been there to kind of advise me and listen
mm,
throughout my career as well, which has
mm,
been really helpful.
mm. That's great. I'm actually glad you brought that topic up because I'm sure you know that our industry, the tech industry, is saturated with more men than women, and I am a strong advocate for pushing women also having opportunities to flourish in tech. And as a woman who has been in the tech space for a while now, how would you say things are getting? Are they getting better? Are things changing? And what advice would you give to a young lady listening out there who also wants to get into tech in a rather male dominated industry?
I definitely think things are changing. I think there's some incredible organizations and voices out there that are talking about how critical this is. And it definitely is changing, which is incredible to see. There's more to do, but it is changing. I think one of the hardest areas I see now is friends of mine who do work in similar industries, who go to have children or have a family.
Mm,
Coming back is so difficult that however much work we do to get more people into tech when they graduate, when they finish their studies and first start work,
mm, mm,
unless we can fix the problem of people wanting to have a family and then returning to work, it's
mm,
always going to end up being more male dominated as
mm,
people get
mm.
senior and
Right,
older. I think
right.
that's where the problem is going to be really hard to fix. But getting more people in is amazing. But we still need to work on how do we
Mm,
get those people to return after having
mm,
families and still feel they can achieve something and that they're
mm,
committed and that they want to stay working in that industry. I think
mm.
that's a really hard problem to overcome.
Mm, yeah, I think the churn there is a huge issue at the moment. Alice, it's amazing talking to you, and I'm so sad I have to ask you my last question because I don't want to let you go, but then I know you have to go. What is the most useful lesson you've learned in life so far, based on everything you have been through from childhood up to where you are now? What what are let me just leave way for more. Some of the major lessons you've learned in life that still guide your life.
I think do things that scare you is a big one. So I'm not very good at it, but I have to
Mm,
remind myself to do things that
mm,
scare me.
mm,
Last year I went on holiday completely on my own, which is not something I would normally do. And I came back and I was like, wow, I can do things on my own. And it was a
mm,
massive
mm,
confidence boost. So I think do things that scare you is important in work, out of work.
mm,
Just because it's scary doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
mm,
I think that's one. I think the second one is, you know, people that you work with could be lifelong friends. I'm really lucky that I've made some amazing friendships through my career,
right,
and those
right.
things come back. Like, even if we don't work in the same job anymore, like
Mm,
that network of people that you
mm,
speak to is so
mm,
important when times are good
right,
and when times are bad, to have that
right,
network of people.
right.
um so that's a critical one. I think probably the last thing is like, just have fun, don't take things too seriously. Like, you know work can be hard, it can be stressful, like,
Mm,
and it gets to all of us at certain points. But
mm,
if you can have that group of people around you who want to have fun, want to enjoy it, and like ultimately don't take themselves too seriously, I think that's kind of the perfect working environment to me. Is like,
mm,
work hard when you need to, but enjoy it, enjoy the success that comes with that.
mm. That is amazing. Alice, thank you so much for making time to join the TechSub podcast. I actually underestimated how much fun our conversation was going to be. We had an interaction, one catch up on like in BigSpark, and I knew it was going to be great, but I didn't think it was going to be this good. And I really enjoyed having you on the pod, and looking forward to seeing the next phase of your career and seeing what you do at BigSpark.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. The journey of changing careers from humanities to the tech industry can seem intimidating. The tech consulting field values strong critical thinking, communication abilities, and intellectual curiosity, skills developed through the study of history and politics. With a good plan and a strategy, together with mentorship, Alice reminds us that there is enough space for everyone in the tech industry. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Tech Stuff Podcast. See you in the next episode.